Hello everyone. Welcome to my teaching learning session with Sonal Singh Pawar. I'll be taking the BA courses and we start again and continue with school psychology, which is BPCS 184. And taking care of Unit 3, continuing with developmental theories, which are one of the most important theories of school psychology. Knowing that we started with developmental theories of developmental, talking about cognitive development, a little about physical development, now we continue with one of the most important theories, which is Kohlberg's moral development theory. Moral development theory are considered to be important because they've been fabricated and been divided by two psychologists and given by two psychologists. One was Kohlberg, which was given in terms of 3 stages, and one was Piaget. Both the psychologists, when we talk about Lawrence Kohlberg and Jean Piaget, stated that moral development takes place in children right from the beginning and till a certain amount of age. Kohlberg gave an extended and a very extensive stages of 3, which again were bifurcated into each stages having 2 parts. And at the same time, Piaget was a little different in terms of moral development. He stated that children are divided completely on a very distinct basis on 2 stages. Simple 2 stages, which talks about children below the age of 8 and 9 are going to decide about what is good, what is bad, what is right and what is wrong on the basis of externalized morals, which is morals which are given by parents. And at the same time, when we speak about the children who are after 9 and 10 develop their own sense of morals. So now the morals are more internalized. We have a sense of right and wrong. We have experiences. Obviously, a teenager who is 11 and 12 years old has a mind of its own, is studying social contract, is studying social paradigm and civics in their own school living. So that's how we divided the stages into 2 simple thought process. Whereas when we talk about Lawrence Kohlberg, his extensive amount of study, being an American psychologist, was on moral development. He was far different. His stages were advanced than Piaget. They were more extended. They were differentiated, as I said, in 3 stages. And children responses were based on moral dilemmas. So Kohlberg had given moral dilemmas to children, and on the basis of that, of different stages and different ages, and on the basis of that, these stages came into development. Piaget refers that the level of moral development in action proceeds into 2 stages, which is hetero and autonomous. So Piaget will, divide stages into 2, whereas Kohlberg divides it into a stage of 3, which is again very extensive, very elongated. Speaking of Piaget's theory at length, Piaget stated there are 2 kinds of development in 1932 of moral thinking. So our thought process of what is right and wrong according to children, which is children below the age of 8, the rules are unchangeable here. The rules are absolute. The realism is absolute for children here. That means everything is imposed by external authority. That's the reason use the term as externalization. The morals are externalized here. Nothing is something which is internalized. As we grow above, which is above 8 years of age, which is 9, 10, and 11, at the time, the puberty hits to the body, and also equally the mind is growing in terms of cognition and mind is growing in terms of experiences. Autonomous moral thinking comes according to Jean Piaget. He stated that now rules are created by people and they can be negotiated. So now children might be lying, but they would be lying on the basis of reasons, very thoughtful reasons that they would have, supporting somebody, helping somebody in need of the hour. Whereas when we talk about children at the age of 5, 6, they would not be lying. It's completely internalized. It's an absolute thing given by parents, which could be any authority. It could be a parent, it could be a teacher, it could be a sibling, where lying is completely incorrect. So they are associated to reward and punishment also. In heteronomous, autonomous is never ruled by reward and punishment. Here, everything is more on the society level. They learn from experiences, they create their own rules. It's more moral relativism. Whereas when we spoke about the upper, which was hetero, it was moral realism, which is everything is absolute. Where now, in Piaget's last stage, nothing was absolute. Simple stages of 2 given by Piaget. Now let's come to the stages of Lawrence Kohlberg. Lawrence Kohlberg, as stated, were youth stages. So we have approximately 3 stages divided into 1, 2, 1, 2, which is every stage has 2 parts into it. So let's talk about the first stage, which talks about infancy, as per the image given on the right. It states that when we speak about infants are too young to understand what is right and wrong, right, like their cognition. Their cognition is not able to have an object permanence. They're still animistic. They are making, there's a make-believe thought process. There is a lot of imagination. So here, the stage is obedience versus punishment. That means no difference between the right thing and avoiding punishment. That means the child will learn that anything is wrong because I'm being punished, and anything is right because I'm being rewarded. So that's how obedience and punishment comes into play. That's what the stage is all about. Again, this stage is externalized. Everything is given by external authority. Our parents are the last sayers for infants, because infants do not know the difference of right and wrong. They understand a wrong by the punishment and right by the reward. Then, as we grow to preschoolers are children who are 2 plus 3, and at times a lot of children go to preschool for a longer age, which is 4 years of age, different to different countries. And self-interest is the second part of the first stage. So the second part says self-interest. Now the interest shifts to rewards. The children would rather want more rewards than punishment. So their efforts it's to secure more benefits. So now, whenever they hear that you should not be doing this because it's wrong, and like for example, drinking a lot of milk is correct, you'll become stronger. And strong individuals are able to, if a parent says they're able to hold themselves well amongst the others, that's a reward for a child. Also, children who do not lie are able to better present themselves in front of other people. Again, something which is a reward. So here everything is based on self-interest. They feel that they are being rewarded. There's an interest that is coming into play, and that is what is correct thing to do. Again, morals are internalized. They're on the basis of reward right now. Now, as the children shifts from preschool and they're now independent, they go to school for 6 hours, which is the school age, which can start from the age of 4 plus for a lot of children, and 5, 6 for the rest. So your children are independent. They stay in school for right from 8 in the morning until 12, at times 1:30. So it's a long span that they are independent. Now, children at the age, at the standard of 3/4, and at the age of 6 and 7, you will find them at the second stage, with first part of the second stage, which is conformity and interpersonal accord. They want to conform to things. They want to conform to their teachers. They want to conform to their heads of the school. They want to conform to probably the prefects, the class monitor. So they have this thing of good boy, good girl image, which is effort now is secured for approval. It is secure to have that image. It is secure to have that friendly relationship with others. So they understand that interpersonal relationships are important. That's why interpersonal accord and morals are given on the basis of this. So probably a head girl or a class monitor or class representative, whatever is told to them by the class monitor is going to be confirmed by the child. Why? Because they feel that that's the right thing to do, and there's this good girl good boy image. And that's the reason, at the age of 6 and 7, we find children becoming teachers pet, and they love listening to teachers completely. Collection of copies, cleaning the classes, cleaning the blackboards. They love taking those monitorship and being a part of the class. Why? They know that interpersonal relationship is something which is teaching them a lot, and they feel what is coming out of these heads interpersonally needs to be confirmed, and they are right. So morals are associated like that, which is coming through approval. As soon as we shift to the school age at the age of 8 and 9, which is approximately 7, 8, and 9, the last stages of school age, here comes the authority and social order. Children are learning a lot of political science at this point of time. They learn how the world works. They understand how how there are different set of occupations which are placed in our country. That's the time that children not only have knowledge but is gaining on experience. Again, this stage range is school age according to Kohlberg, but here the orientation is towards fixed truth. Why? The constitution, the rules, the guidelines, they are very fixed even when the children study. So the purpose of morality here is to maintain social order. Now, if you tell a child that the person was stealing something, they would say completely that they need to be punished. There is no second thought about it, because they want to maintain the social order. Yes, here children at this point of time, at the age of 7, 8, and 9, are a little white and black. There is no grays hair here. There is no relativism. They only understand that there is an authority and there is a societal order which is being given to us, which is society has given some rule and they need to be maintained. Interpersonal accord, which is interpersonal relationships, are obviously increased and are gaining on with each passing day. They are increasing and they expand as the child is not only interacting now with teachers, but there are friends at a greater level. There are seniors, there are juniors that they're interacting with. So interpersonal accord is expanding. Their orientation towards moral is on the basis of authority and on the basis of the order given by the society, which is again coming from bookish knowledge. Now, coming to the last stage, there's a huge transition that we will see. Children move from school age to teenagers. Teenagers is a time where relativism is very high. There is a high sense of egocentrism that comes to children, which suggests that, when we say that it's high level of egocentrism, we need to understand there is a social contract that you will see in children now. So speaking of social contract, is there's a mutual benefit and reciprocity that teens start developing in terms of morals. So morally right, legally right are not always the same according to teenagers. Why? Because something where they end up supporting a person, like for example, a child feels that this is something which is being done wrong by their friend, but they feel that that's supporting their friend, and that's been in terms of that's something which has supported them pushing the friend forward, and that's not a harmful thing. So it's probably something which is in terms of the school policy is wrong, but it could be morally right for the child. So now the thought of the relativity, the middle path, the gray comes in as teenager starts, and the rules here are made on the basis what makes you feel better, what makes you feel right. So morals are something which are correct in your views, and morals are something which makes you feel better. So here teenagers are actually making a social contract. Why social contract? Thought process which they have discovered to be right and wrong, and in amalgamation with what the society tells them. So they come on a social contract and build their own rules. The last comes out to be universal principle. This is also adulthood, which is leaving the teenagers at the age of 15, 15, 16, the teen stays on social contract. 17 to 20 is the moral development final part of the stage 3, which is adulthood. Here, the morality is based on complete principles. We have had so much of experience by 20, 22 years of life that we are now having our own principles, that this is something that needs to be done in this pattern, morally correct. So that transcends the mutual benefit. There are no mutual benefits that they hold on to. Everything works on the basis of the principles that adults hold. That's why, it's so difficult when we are communicating, two individuals where one is a teen and the other is an adulthood. You will find there are so concrete thought process coming from an adult on morals, and there is so much of leverage, so much of middle path that comes from a teenager. That's how teens move towards universal principle in the final stage of moral schoolwork. Completing and giving a complete overview of the theory, Lawrence Kohlberg stated that it's an extensive development, which is moral development. His entire theory was based on it. He stated there are 3 stages divided into, bifurcated into 6 parts. We start from punishment and obedience and self-interest, and we finish with universal principles, which actually states that we are not absolute, but we hold principle on the basis of the knowledge about and being worldly wise. That completes with one of the biggest theories of moral development in developmental theories. Now, moving to another thought process, which was given by Carol Gilligan. Carol Gilligan was a social psychologist, along with Eric Erikson and Kohlberg's research that Gilligan assisted. She believed that Kohlberg's moral development theory was biased towards males. Since the subject of the study were males only, since the moral dilemmas that were given to male children and not given to female children, so Gilligan stated that there is a gender difference in moral development. So that was something that she came up when she studied the extended theories of Erik Erikson and also Lawrence Kohlberg. She stated that boys and girls have different tendency towards moral thinking and psychological tendencies. So while men would think in terms of justice, more absolute rules, women emphasizes that thought of care, nurturing relationships. That's how I feel male and female are divided into 2 pathways. The fact that we have father of white matter makes us more emotionally sensitive and makes us more stronger emotionally, more stable in comparison to males today. And males having more of gray matter makes them more concrete, makes them more analytical. That's why justice and rules are something which Carol Gilligan stated in terms of moral development, and 2 genders are going to be. In other words, she also believed that women are not inferior, rather they are different from men, which again was stated because psychology was running not only in terms of Erik Erikson. There was Sigmund Freud who stated that women are not superior. So with so much happening around, Carol Gilligan gave her emphasis that there are gender differences in moral development. Plus, women are not inferior in any sort of moral thinking. It's just that we are made differently, and our functioning are based on different ethics, which is care and care for women, nurturing for women, and concreteness and justice for male. Also, she devised a theory that was, comprising the same thought process of Lawrence Kohlberg, which has pre-conventional, conventional, post-conventional stages, with their changes occur in selfish stages, social stages, and principled morality. These stages were coming from, again, from Lawrence Kohlberg. Lawrence Kohlberg stages were also called pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. Gilligan also very strongly asserted that transition from one stage to another is not because of the cognitive capacity as it was given by Kohlberg and Jean Piaget. Rather, it's just because of the sense of self that you hold. So, according to Gilligan, there is an individual difference, there is a gender difference in moral thinking. Also, Karen Gilligan, she is asserting that there are no inferiority and superiority in two genders. Rather, we pass from one stage to the other, not on the basis of our cognitive, which is thinking, reasoning, problem solving abilities, but on the basis of our sense of self, how strong, how self built, how strong, properly selfish, how socially built we are. So her theory was a little different from the others, but also made a mark. Now coming to the theories of language development, there was quite a lot of contribution on the language development that we had. Language starts not at the time the child is born; it happens in different parameters. Children do have an amazing ability to learn, and language is one of the first of the few milestones that we wish our children to complete. India has multilingualism and also bilingualism, which is something which is a not only appreciated but also given to children. Bilingualism is something which we appreciate, we're giving Hindi and English. Multilingualism is coming as a third language to education and society of learning, where we give children an extra third or foreign language. And also there are policies pertaining to languages and education which evidences a hierarchical structure between dominant and minority language. There was some double divide which came into the times when the language development was taken, whereas English and major regional language to be given, which is English will always stay paramount, and there should be some regional language that should be given. Then there was a language divide on the basis of regional language should be the first, and there should be indigenous tribal minority language also that comes into play. So speaking of that, these are the two divide in the country that goes on in India in education system. There are a lot of countries where, and there are a lot of cities in our own country where we do have an indigenous language. If talking about a board examination, which the before the undergrads the children have given, they did have their indigenous language also where there could be a tempting paper according to the cities that they're residing apart English. So that's again been a language divide in the educational system also. Now, coming to the contribution, understanding how development of language happens in children. So we start with the most important, the most influential thought, which was the learning thought, which is the behaviorist with John Watson and B.F. Skinner. So Skinner is B.F. Skinner, which was Boris Friedrich Skinner, and he was an American psychologist. He was the one who gave us instrumental conditioning, stating about reward and punishment. So he was a behaviorist, which gave us that language development happens because of operant conditioning. Very simple thought. So that means we let children, we shape their language, we give them prompts, and all of that prompts is learned by children by imitating others, by getting rewarded or getting punished. So the mechanism of learning language is shaping, modeling, rewarding, prompting. So this is all on the basis of something which is operant conditioning, which is also called as the instrumental conditioning. And an example given as such, we can use the same example. The time the mother holds a glass of milk and says milk, the child observes, retains the phonic sound of the word and associates it with a glass of milk always. So that's again something which we talk about as imitating others, being able to observe something and learn. Skinner also gave us some of the models of language development, which is motivating operations, discriminative stimuli, response, and shaping. So these were some contingencies of his model, which is how do we learn language primarily by motivating, primarily by imitating, which is copying others, discriminating stimuli, which is helping you understand that there are 4 different things kept and you need to differentiate and learn. And the last was shaping. So this was B.F. Skinner, who was a behaviorist. After that came Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky has been a greater name in the language development, American linguistic, and then later a psychologist who opposed the ideas of Piaget, opposed the ideas of B.F. Skinner, which I would say rather oppose the ideas of all the behaviorists. He stated that children acquire a language ability in seamlessly effortless manner, that the mechanism for the same is hardwired in the brain already. So according to Noam Chomsky, we already have the ability to something, we already have the ability to learn something. Why? Because our brain is hardwired in such a way that we already have the skill. So the language acquisition device, according to Noam Chomsky, was already there in our mind. So according to him, there is, in a general hypothetical prevalence, there is a box in our brain already fixed. Ideally, we would not say a box if we scientifically talk about it. We do have a Bronick and a Wernicke's area, which is responsible for language in our cerebral cortex. So ideally, it's correct, but associating to the fact that the child has every ability because they already are hardwired and they have an acquisition device was also a little away from the other psychologists, which was Jean Piaget and B.F. Skinner. So Noam Chomsky further said that we have the concept of universal grammar, all language structure and rules in that language acquisition device. So we are not born as a blank slate. We already have the ability, according to Noam Chomsky. We are born with the ability to acquire language because we have that in us. Let's understand with the language development, the stages of language development that we have. The stages of language development states that 3 to 4, which is as soon as the child is born, there's just there are no sounds, there are just reflexes at that time. After that happens 3 to 4 months, there's this typical term which is used as cooing. Cooing starts, which is first type of sounds coming from the baby's mouth. That's called cooing. Then starts with 6 to 9 months. Babbling, which is the repetition of words like dada, baba. That's like babbling. Little meaning words, and it's broken, obviously. 15 months is the time that 1 year is crossed. The infants start using gestures and potentially 2 to 3 words, robotic tone and words are coming. 18 months is the time that there is echolalia. Echolalia is mimicking what the other person is doing and at times mimicking the words, half-built sentences of other people. So caregivers at this point of time plays a very important role. Then comes from 18 to 24 months, which is from 1.5 year to 2 years. Extremely important. Children at 18 months can actually use 20 words. Not much of a vocabulary comes into them. 20 to 25 words, and in today's generation, I think children can use approximately 30 to 40 words at 18 months. And by 24, this increases greatly to, somewhere around 50 and above. So by 24 to 36, which is the time that a lot of children are going to preschools, they underline the pronouns, they understand the pronouns, which is he, she, they start using the word yes and no for things that they don't like. Vocabulary expands because now children are not only having primary caregivers as the base of experiences and knowledge, but now they are exposed to playgroups, they're exposed to relatives, they're exposed to their preschools that they're going. So there are 300 words in their vocabulary now. A 4 year can start describing how their day is all about. The grammar comes into play. They can start with one-liners, explain what they're going through. By 5 years of age, the language is almost complete. Language is always growing. We learn and read at this point of time, our vocabulary increases. So I feel by 5 years, recitation is good. Children can use multiple words to describe themselves and others. They can understand basic instruction. They can read books alone. So 5 years is the time that a complete language package comes into the child. And by 3, children can go to school. That is the stages of language development that we have. And we have some milestone, like by 3 months, we need to be having children cooing and gurgling. 6 months, babbling is must. 12, the first word should come in, a proper first word. 18 is like 5 to 40 words. 18 months, by 2 years, children should have like word sentences, 300 words. By 3 years, they should ask question, answer, 900,000 words should be there. 4 years should be 2,000 words and 5+ word sentences. 5 years should be identifies letter, creates longer sentences. So 5 years is something where they can describe, they can express their emotion using those words, identifies letters, alphabets, and reading. So these were milestones that we look forward to. Now let's come to theories of psychosocial development. One of the most important theories of psychosocial development that we have is of Erik Erikson. Erik Erikson has been one of the only psychologists who had, along with along with Sigmund Freud, who has given the stages of development of personality. and second was Erik Erikson. Erik Erikson was different from Sigmund Freud because Erik Erikson gave us psychosocial development, whereas Freud gave us psychosexual development, where everything is based on the biological and sexual drives, and needs, and unkempt needs that are there. Whereas Erik Erikson gave the stages of development starting from conception, going on till death. So it's a complete 0 to 90, 0 to 60, whoever and whoever can be put into these categories. Whereas Sigmund Freud started their development at 0, but it went on till 16 years of life, which is only teenagers. Also, Erik Erikson was trained under Freudian psychoanalysis only and was later convinced that it is just not biological drive, it cannot be just sexual development, which was proposed by Sigmund Freud. It has to be beyond that, which is we need to have social interaction, we need to have interaction with other people on that level. And we'll highlight first five stages of development that extends from infancy to adolescent. So that was Sigmund Freud. And Erik Erikson, on the other hand, stages of development talked about a lot of things, which is there are stages starting from 0 and goes on till the last stage of life. And there needs to be a successful crisis. That crisis needs to make you learn a virtue. If you're able to learn a virtue, remember that's going to be successful in handling all the crises in all your development stages. And an unsuccessful development can equally impact your later stages, according to Erik Erikson. Also, successful dealing of crisis is extremely important because that results in healthy and positive development. If you're not able to healthily and able to take care of those successful crises and you are not able to complete those milestones and learn that virtue, it leads to crisis in this stage also and probably further stages also. That's an introduction and difference between Sigmund Freud's development stages and Erik Erikson. Let's understand the entire stages. There are 8 stages of development according to Erik Erikson, and as I said, there is a psychological crisis and a milestone sort of a task that needs to be completed at every stage. There is a fabrication of age in this too, which is these are again stages which are bifurcated on the basis of ages. So it's like ages dividing stages, 8 stages that we have in total. Let's start with the first one. Psychosocial crisis, the first stage is called the trust versus mistrust. This goes on from 0 to 2 years of life. This is the time, the child is completely dependent on their primary caregivers. That could be mother, father, grandparents, and at times some people, nannies also. So the more the caregiver is available to the child at the right time, which is the time the child feels uncomfortable, need for food, need for thirst, need for basic things, and warmth. If the caregiver is present, remember that the child develops a sense of trust. Unfortunately, at stages and in a generation like today, where parents are equally working, do not have time, and usually, stay with the children for first 3 months or 4 months, and there's a lot of time gap between the meeting of the parent or the caregiver. At times, there could be possibility that the child starts developing mistrust. Why? Because the caregiver is not present at the time of feeding, the time of where the child feels uncomfortable, dirty. So there are bouts of crying, and the caregiver is not present. This tends to develop a sense of mistrust in the child. So, see, 2 things can happen. Either you can develop a task, which is trust, or there could be a crisis that develops here, which is mistrust. Now, moving ahead, let's take an example. The trusted child now is a toddler. Now, this child plans to, explore things, do exercises, play with toys. Remember, such children are very autonomous. They know that what they need to pick up, and they'll enjoy, they happily pick up the toy that they're comfortable, they'll look forward to it, gain, move ahead for it, because they're autonomous. They are free enough to decide for themselves. On the other end, the child who are mistrusted, they have this little shame in themselves. I cannot do it. No, this is something I would not be able to do with my ability. The child sticks at one place while playing. They don't move themselves. And this is the stage from 2.5 to 4.5 years of age. And this is equally the time the children are venturing into school. So they are shameful, they're very doubtful about themselves. They probably will not speak they will not recite anything until they're pushed to it, that it's right, you can do it. Whereas an autonomous child will pick up a poem they want to sing, they will recite it out, and they'll be, because they're free to choose. They're trusted. They feel the world is a safer place because of the trust that they develop in the prior stage. Now moving to the third stage, which is the stages of 5, 6, and 7, ideally. And 5, 6, and 7 stages are where we are, initially Not exactly 5, 6, and 7 in our country. It could be 6, 5, 6 in our country where we are preschoolers. We learn to initiate things. So here the children can raise their hands and ask questions in class. So the ones who are autonomous, free to choose, are equally initiative. So if you're trusted, you gain autonomy, you'll be initiating, you'll have less guilt, you plan your day, you will pack your bags, you will ask questions in class, initiate rules while playing. But the ones who are mistrusted, have doubt in themselves, will always feel guilty. They will feel my efforts will not matter. Let's not put it up. I don't need to do this. This is not something which is for me. This is not the kind of task that they are always rethinking about their efforts because they're very guilty about it. Because there's a lot of doubt that is resided in them. This is completely either devices. Then we come to the last stage, the children's stage. Children is this is the play years of life where we are 7, 8, and 9, and this there develops industry versus inferiority. So remember the child who felt that the world is a safe place, can be trusted, I can initiate what I like, I have my likes and dislikes, become industrious. Industrious is the children learn to have the pleasure of applying and participating wherever they feel they like. So they feel I have this ability, I can do this. I learn this game, I can teach it to my friends. So this is what is industry. Whereas children who are mistrusted, doubtful, and shameful, and very guilty about themselves will feel inferior. They feel that we are not a part of this group, we are not a part of this gang. I probably should be sitting. Whenever I'm asked, I'll go. So there's a sense of inferiority that develops. There's again a crisis for life for them. Why? Because the next stage is a stage of identity versus confusion. This is a teenager's main stage of development. Why do we say teenager's main stage of development? Because teenage is a time where children who have been trusted, been faithful, been very autonomous and very industrious about themselves, know what they want to study, what career path they need to choose. They probably have a sense of self. They know who am I, what is my role in my playgroup, what is my role in my class, what do I want to become. They're very single entity. Whereas when we talk about children, on the other hand, who are mistrusted, are very guilty, feel very inferior, doubtful about themselves, they are going to be confused of what they want to do in life. That's why they will do what their parents say, what their friends pick up as career choices. They are confused about what they want to do. They are confused about who they are. And this is the time at the age of 14, 15, and 16, children get into drug abuse, get into vandalism, get into delinquent behaviors because they are completely confused and distracted. So that finishes with an identity versus confusion. I feel this stage is and this is one of the longest stage, and a stage that Eric Erikson has put his lot of researches into, stating that crisis at this stage would probably spoil the further other stages that are coming. So if you do not have an identity, remember, by 18, 19, 20, 21, children look forward to intimacy, which is as young adults they want to form close relationship, find a partner, intimacy and love. So the ones who have an identity are able to work well, educate themselves, find a partner. The ones who are not able to do that are, isolated because they are confused. They don't know what to do. When once you don't know what you want to do, how do you cater to have a love? How do you become intimate with somebody? How do you plan a life with somebody? That doesn't happen. So that's how we feel isolated. This part of the mistrusted and confused people feel isolated, and they feel that they do not have the capacity to form a close relationship. Then we come to the second last stage, which is the middle age stages. Once you have a family, develop a family, which happens in every individual, there comes the identified individuals who are going to be very generative. That means the middle age discovers sense of their world. This is what we have done in life, and this is how much we will leave for our children as generative adults. Whereas the others who have been isolated and confused do not know what is the sense of purpose, what their life has given to them, and what they can leave for their children. They're one of those who might say, okay, my work is fine, my family is fine, let my children do whatever they want to, because they lack purpose. They feel we do not have much that we can give it to their children. So it's even lacking wisdom and even lacking material assets for their children. So they're not generative, they're very stagnant. This leads to the last stage, which is the final stage. So the people who have been identified well, formed an intimacy, were generative middle adults, are now very integrate. Integrate means when they look back at their life, they feel they've done a lot. There's a sense of satisfaction and contentment. Looking back, okay, my children have everything, and I could also leave a lot for them. Had a great amount of life, good amount of life. Their retirement is pleasing to them. They feel this is the time they can enjoy now. Whereas on the other hand, the ones who've been right from the beginning who have been mistrusted, doubtful, shameful, and inferior, later, isolated, stagnant, become very despaired, which is they literally feel cursed that I did not do anything. My life has not been very satisfied. I have nothing that I've recollected. Hope I could run the 10 years of my life back again, which I feel is a lot that happens to the middle generation and the adulthood. But this tends to give a lot of psychologically tensed moments to the later adults in later life, which is despair. This finishes with the eight stages of Erik Erikson stating the psychosocial development, and eight stages talking about virtues that are learned, tasks that needs to be completed for successful development, and if not, it leads to crisis. And further other things that can happen to adults, children, or later adults if they do not follow the same pattern. This finishes with Erik Erikson, and let's move to further more theories, which was social learning theory, which was given by a Canadian American psychologist, Albert Bandura. So this theory is again about telling how children tend to learn most of the things around the world. So this is called the social learning theory, that says that social behavior is majorly acquired by imitation and observation of others' behavior, which ideally is true. And I feel maximum amount of social learning, especially the social learning which are values, virtues, even behaviors that children imitate, are coming from the social learning, which is imitating mediational processes which are essential to learn a new behavior. So if you want to learn a new behavior, there are four processes. You need to be attentive, retentive, reproductive, and motivated. So it's like a behavior needs to be attended well if you want to learn it. You need to retain it well, like keep it in your memory for a longer duration. If you retain it well, is the time that you will be able to retrieve it well, which is reproduce the same kind of behavior which you have modeled or seen, and now you can demonstrate it. Last is motivation. This is the reward and punishment that follows the behavior that you have shown. Once you reward or punish, this is like a vicarious observation. Smallest vicarious observation is defined as smallest of behaviors that are attempted are reinforced. So they are rewarded, and thus individual get a consequence, a rewarding consequence, and thus again the mediational process goes back to attention. You learn another behavior in the same pattern. You attend to it, you retain it, you reproduce it, get rewarded again, learn another behavior. So a child learns to say thank you. Probably the child will learn to say sorry also, the same pattern. Child will learn how to make friends like that by observing parents, by observing siblings, etc. So this was social learning theory by Albert Bandura. Then we have an attachment theory, which was proposed by John Bowlby, and it was extended by Mary Ainsworth. Bowlby stated that children develop in a zone of attachment, which happens with the caregiver, which is when we talk about the caregiver, which is your child and the mother. So there's a bond which is formed in the beginning, which is called attachment. And if the child is deprived from most of the social and emotional basic relational needs, child develop a deficiency, which could further reflect in their adult relationship also. So this attachment behavioral system works on the following assumption. So, for example, if the child is able to form and seek a good attachment, proximity seeking happens. How does it start? First is proximity seeking, the need of the child to be with the attachment figure, especially during stress. So we all see, as soon as the child falls down, as soon as the child gets hurt, the first thing that they look forward to is who's caressing us, who's taking care of us. So that's proximity seeking. Then a secure base, which is child experiences comforted and security from the attachment figures. That means that the child always look forward to the same figure every time. So every time you find them, there's a security which is formed. Then also there's another behavioral system that happens, which is separation. The child objects upon withdrawal. We all know there is separation anxiety that hits children at the age of 6 years, 6 weeks. The anxiety starts happening to children, to infants, and with the passage of time, it goes on till 1.5 year to children. If they're able to develop a function of attachment and the child gets what he or she needs at the time of separation, proximity, and secureness, the child feels good. If they do not, they develop separation anxiety in later life. Also, this is something which talks about the attachment behavioral system. Imagine if the child is not getting the love, not getting the relational needs, emotional need, there is a deficiency that creates, that makes the child neglected. So neglected children with distress, when they are distressed by affective regulation strategies, these children use two strategies. One is hyperactivation strategy, the other is hyper deactivation strategy. So such children who are neglected will use two strategy, which you'll be seen they'll be tightly holding their parents very tightly, not let them go. That's hyperactivation. One is deactivation, which is thought suppression, distancing. I'll give an example. If a child is experiencing too much of separation anxiety and do not have a secure base as their parents, remember these are neglected children. They do not feel the secure base with parents. So you might see as soon as the parents come to preschool to pick up their children, they're hitting their parents at that time. That's a neglected mode strategy, which is deactivation. They are suppressing their thought and violently distancing them from their parents. They want to move away from them. And the other would be clinging to them very tightly, sticking to them for like 15 good minutes very tightly, very coercively. So these are some ways of identifying neglected children. Now there are some stages of attachment also, as given on the image on the right. You can see first from birth to 3 months. This is a very pre-attachment stage. Too early to say things. This is the time where the child is learning to form a bond with their caregiver, which is like could be the mother and the father. Then we come to 6 weeks and 7 months, which is from this time there is an indiscriminate attachment. This is the stage where babies actually display more observable social behavior. Why it's indiscriminate? The child is imitating too much, copying a lot of behavior, and we expose the children also to too many people coming to see the child along. So at this point of time you might see a lot of children showing separation anxiety, pangs of crying. Then from 7 to 11 months, there would be a specific or a discriminate attachment, which is they might display stranger anxiety because they had developed attachment to one person. Now they will show, stranger anxiety to people they don't know. And then there are after 2 years and plus, they have separate attachments. That means attachment to their mothers, father, sibling, grandparents, strangers. They know what kind of attachment needs to be with what kind of people. So these are different stages of attachment according to John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, which was taken ahead. Now, moving to theories of gender development that we have. Speaking of this, we need to know that how we need to learn how gender comes to children. See, gender starts and gets formed by the age of 3.5, 4 years. And how do they come? They come with gender roles and identities, gender role identities. So children observe their parents and significant elders and imitate the behaviors of the same sex parent. Majorly, social learning theory is credited to have this because they feel that it's the social learning, which is imitating others, is how genders are learned. Also, genders are learned on the basis of the kind of environment we give to children. The first is imitation, and imitation says that imitating appropriate behaviors, getting followed by reward and reinforcement, increases your prevalence of having that behavior. So, if a child is getting ready, a boy is getting ready, and he picks up a gun and he puts it in his pocket and he plays with it. And if he's rewarded for that, remember he'll be rewarded for that because he's a boy. The kind of toys the boy pick up is something which is very reinforcing to the parents also. So again, associating to very triggering factors and strongly associated factors to boys, and the child gets reinforced. The child gets to know that this is the kind of behaviors I need to do. Gender typed role again. Now a girl coming to a room, picking up a soft toy, sitting very very sweetly and in a very poisedly manner, will be reinforced. If she is reinforced, remember again, she learns to redo this behavior which she is imitated from her mother or from her sibling. So reward and reinforcement allows the child to increase the likelihood of such a behavior. And if you punish, the child will stop doing it. That's why, at times when boys pick up stuffed toys or dolls are actually punished at the beginning or scolded, which actually, collapse. The entire imitation is stopped there. They are not allowed to do it. The other way where we learn gender roles and gender typing behaviors is gender schema theory by Sandra Beam. In 1981, it quoted that social learning theory can be combined with cognitive processes. So the child in her growing years forms a schema of what is a male and what is a female. He observes a boy and girl and organizes these categories as girl schemas and boy schema. So schema is what? Schemas are framework which has a lot of rules inside it. So she stated that we should associate cognitive thinking with something which is imitation, which is you can associate children to learn a schema. What is a girl? How is a girl? And bracket her there. And similarly for boys. So she tries trying to say gender identities are further developed in a more concrete pattern like this. Today in our country, I feel gender roles are something which is vastly talked about because the environment talks about a lot of genders that are coming into play, because not only because of gender role identities but also confusion in people about the same. So that allows us to be secular about accepting as many genders as we have. But we always begin with a male and a girl in female schema. Now, coming to another important theory, that was Yuri Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory, as we came to psychosocial theories now. This was a theory of ecological system that talks about that how a human or a child develops in a system, which is ecological system, which is a paradigm of multiple systems that we have. The ecology is important because the child will always develop along with the environment, along with the context. So this was like a contextual theory by Yuri Bronfenbrenner. It was a global theory that talks about multiple system. Let's discuss it, having the image on front. So the child, the purple circle has the individual, which is the child, the health, the surname, name, and sex and gender in it. Now the child's first system is the microsystem. The microsystem is our system which talks about the family, the schools, the system which are closely associated directly. Then comes the mesosystem, which is the combination of the exo and the interaction, which is something that you don't see in everyday life. These are not every, some people don't. Some people have family friends, some people don't. So it's not a direct interaction. Then we have a macro systems, which are a farther away system, not directly affecting us, which is, your ideologies, your spirituality, your religion, your ways of, you know, your morality of the outer world. So the closest is micro, which is family, your peers, your school, your teachers impacting you most. So this theory states that how children are greatly impacted the context that they're a part of. Like, let's take an example of an exosystem, which is neighbors, your mother's father's workplace, mass media. So if a child sees something, a vibrant tool or a gadget in the mass media, that will impact their interaction with microsystem, which is their parents. They will nag and complain their parents to get that gadget, and will directly impact. So did we see how interactions happen? So there are micro, meso, exo, macro. The last system that we have here is chrono. It's not something which is exclusive to all. It's something which is time bound, socio-historical condition, which not everybody is a part of, like war-aided children, people who have survived natural calamities and lost their properties in lives in natural calamity, lost their parents, etc. So these are patterning of environmental event, transition over life course. Their micro, meso, exo are completely different. So imagine a person who's lost their parents in natural calamities. Their microsystem do not have family, and exosystem do not have neighbors, family, friends. So that's how their entire system context impacts their development differently. So that finishes with something which we have as contextual theory, one of the most famous theory of Yuri Bronfenbrenner of ecological systems. Then we had a theory for Indian kids, which was us. Durga Sinha gave us a model of deprivation, which was again an ecological system, stating that we are comprising of only two layers. We don't have systems. Our ecology has two concentric layers: the upper visible, upper and more visible, and one is supporting surrounding. The upper visible has home, family, peer groups, which emphasizes on social roles, identities, etc. Whereas when we talk about the supporting and the close surrounding layer, this comprises of something which is going to talk about your culture, your physical environment, the kind of houses that you are living, the kind of families you have, joint family, nuclear families, caste, class, resources, the kind of schools, AC schools, non-AC schools that we are going through. This is more an Indian concept that we have and an Indian thought process. And then we will start with the next unit in the next session that will talk about disability of children. And this completes with developmental theories at this, where we talked about not only development, but language development, development of psychosocial development, and also personality development that talks about Erik Erikson. So we had moral development, we had psychosocial developmental theory, ecological developmental theories today, which had a global phenomena, which was Yuri Bronfenbrenner, contextual, and something which was talking about the Indian contextual theory, which was concentric layers, that is associating to the upper visible and supporting surrounding. Different to different ecology. When we talk about Indian ecology, we talk also of things which are surrounding us, more primarily our caste, class, resources, etc. Thank you so much.